Good morning, dear students, colleagues. Welcome to the fourth edition of Innovation Talks of the LUMSA University of Rome. 10 weekly webinars aimed to discuss innovation, technology, sustainability, and the future of business society with expert and opinion leaders in the business community. Innovation Talks are organized by the Department of Law, Economics, Politics, and Modern Languages, and the Master's Degree in Management and Finance, in partnership with Association of Alumni LUMSA. I thank Professor Claudio Giannotti, the chair of the department, and all the colleagues that are part of the innovation teams LUMSA, that with me, with Claudio, are organizing these initiatives in our university. Today we talk about venture capital and biotech. So I'm very happy to introduce my colleague, Professor Domenico Nesci, that is the professor of venture capital and evaluation in LUMSA. And this is part of this what we have labeled as innovation team of our university. So I leave the floor to Domenico. Thanks, Domenico, for your work and for your for to be part of our faculty.
Thank you, Filippo. Good morning, everybody. Very happy to be here again with our fourth innovation talk. Welcome, everybody, and particularly welcome to Ciro, that will be having his speech in a few minutes. Just to introduce Ciro. So Ciro is a dear friend and a very strong, exceptional professional. He spent most of his professional life in venture capital, moving in over time in a number of different ventures. So he started in Innogest, then from Innogest moved to L Venture Group. That is a seed venture cap. Innogest, of course, is a very well-known venture capital partnership based in Milano, here in Italy. Then he moved into L Venture Group, seed venture capital firm based in Rome. From L Venture Group, then to Invitalia Ventures, a publicly owned venture capital firm based in Rome again. From Invitalia Ventures back to Milano in Vertis, and then last but most important, he set up his own venture capital partnership with Pietro Puglisi, whose name is Claris Venture, just last year, and this is the core of his speech today, because in Claris Ventures, he and Pietro infused their views of how venture capital in Italy can be successful. And Claris Venture performed already the first two investments and is moving forward to the next ones. So again, thank you to Ciro for sharing his views with us. I'm very keen on getting to know more about how they are interpreting biotech here in Italy. Biotech is very popular nowadays because actually two startups collaborated substantially into developing two of the most used vaccines against COVID, to fight COVID. So, Ciro, the floor is yours. Let us know more about your views. Thank you.
Thank you, Domenico, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for this kind invitation to be here today. For me, it's a real pleasure to share my experience and some knowledge on venture capital and biotech with you. In support of today's discussion, I have prepared a presentation which now I'm going to share. Please give me some seconds. Okay, I suppose that you should see the slide. So, as we said before, the topic of today's talk is biotech and venture capital. Before getting into the discussion, let me give you a very little and fast introduction about myself. My name is Ciro Spedaliere, and I am the co-founder of Claris Venture, the first Italian operator of venture capital exclusively focused on investment in biotech startups. Meaning for that, new companies that are developing new potential drugs for disease with high unmet clinical need. Before that, as Domenico said before, I have been working in the venture capital industry for 10 years, serving management position in 4 other venture capital players. Sometimes I make jokes with colleagues that I worked in the half of the ecosystem. Unfortunately, considering the small number of Italian venture capitalists, this is more a sad truth than a funny joke. So let's start with biotech. So what is biotech? Surely it's a very hot topic today, given the pandemic times we are all experiencing. Generally, when we talk about biotech, we mean innovative companies that are developing highly innovative drugs for curing incurable disease. The term biotech appeared in the 70s when the famous biotech revolution took place, which changed the face of the pharmaceutical industry. 2 fundamental characters of this revolution were Herbert Boyer, that was a biochemist of the University of California, and Robert Swanson, that at that time it was just 29 years old, and he was a venture capitalist in a very famous venture capital fund, Clarins Venture. So Boyer developed a new revolutionary technology, the recombinant DNA. Recombinant DNA is DNA that has been artificially created by combining DNA from multiple sources, human, bacteria, animals. So practically, they put a human gene into DNA of a bacterial cell. In this way, the bacterial cell have the instruction to encode for the human protein expressed in the gene that was inserted. So bacterial cells or animal cells have become factories for the production of human proteins. So Swanson read about the work of Boyer, and he left his venture capital job to become an entrepreneur and convinced Boyer to create a company. So that company was Genentech, one of the most successful biotech companies in the history of the biotech. And still now, if you go in front of their office, you can see the statue of that epic moment when Swanson met Boyer for the first time in a bar of San Francisco. After being incorporated in 1976, the company went out on the market with its first product in 1982, so after 6 years. It was synthetic human insulin, the first engineering drug in the history. These kind of drugs that are produced from other living cells are called biologic. And today, the worldwide annual turnover of these kind of drugs, the biologics, is more than 250 billion, just to figure the huge impact that had that technology. So why this technology was so revolutionary? Because it allowed us to treat a disease that there were very difficult or even impossible to cure. And because it has enabled us to produce large-scale human proteins. It was also the foundation that led to the development of many other biologics. For example, we can think of the AstraZeneca vaccine that use a virus as a vector. Virus cannot be made as a cooking recipe by assembling different ingredients, but must be produced using living cells. To give an example of the impact that the first biological drug produced by Genentech had, we must think that up to the 70s, insulin, that is a protein that is essential for patients that suffer of diabetes, was produced from pig waste. In particular, the pancreas of the pigs was used, and they need about 2 tons of waste to produce 200 grams of insulin, so a very small quantity. Production was not scalable, and it was not possible to produce enough insulin for all diabetic patients. Furthermore, animal insulin was not tolerated by all patients because the immune system recognized it as a foreign agent, and so it could start an immune response against the human insulin. Now, insulin instead is produced in these large bioreactors. Inside each of them, there are living cells, so bacteria cells, with the recombinant DNA inside, and they produce human insulin. So biotech startup could have a tremendous impact on the health of the patients. But the creation of a biotech startup is certainly something more difficult than in other sectors of innovation for different reasons. First of all, we have so many different perspectives that must try to amalgamate into a single thing, and it's not always so easy. We have scientists that they are very passionate about science, working on the discovery of new biological mechanisms and the creation of new technology. We have clinicians that treat patients and have the deep knowledge of the disease. Then we have entrepreneurs that want to do business and try to take the drug on the market. And consider that in this sector, entrepreneurs usually are not the inventors who discovered something, because here, unfortunately, we don't have companies like Facebook created by a student during his college time, because the human body is extremely complex, and to discover something meaningful, you must have studied for so many years. So usually inventors of something meaningful in this sector are professor or people or PhD or postdoc researcher, people that have spent at least 10, 15 years studying something. Then we have investors like, for example, venture capitalists like me, that are fundamental element to finance the development of these new drugs and make them a reality, a drug for patients. We have then regulators that they say you can do this, you can do that, and they have a huge impact on the process of the drug development, because also they can also say that you didn't show enough data, so maybe they could require you additional experiments, and they can also stop your process, as we can see now in this moment. And finally, and in my view, the most important of all, you got the patients. While we can have a lot of conversation about this different perspective at the back of our minds, I hope that all of us will keep in mind that the bottom line is actually patients. It is also important to keep in mind that this is a particular market, because this is the only market where the customer is the one who uses the product but does not pay for it. In fact, the customer, that is the patients, unlike other markets, they cannot choose the product, that in this case is the drug, because this is chosen by the doctor. And who pays for the drug is still a third party, the governments in case of Europe. Instead, if we go in the US, the insurance company are paying for that. Another complexity to keep in mind is the development process. It takes at least 10, 15 years to develop a drug. And furthermore, the process is very complex and requires so many different skills. In the first phase of research and discovery, we have scientists that discover a new biological mechanism that could be responsible for a disease. Molecules are then created that can have an effect on this biological mechanism. And of these molecules, a lot of molecules were created. Only few of them could have a possible effect. These will be optimized, and when a good candidate is found, preclinical tests are then carried out. For example, on human cell lines, which are called ex vivo experiment, and on animal models that are called in vivo experiment. These animal models could be mice, dogs, pigs, monkeys. After that, if all goes well, you have an approval to go in the clinic. You can go on the human trial that consists of 3 phases. In phase 1, the safety of the drug is tested, and usually is tested on healthy volunteers, with the exception of oncology, where instead of healthy volunteers, you have the drug used directly into the patients. In any case, the goal of this phase is to understand how safe the drug is and if it has some toxicity or side effect. Here in this phase, we usually have 80 people, and it costs between 10 and 20 million. After the phase 2, after phase 1, we have phase 2, in which we begin to test on patients in a larger number, between 100 and 500. Here we usually test different doses of the drug to understand which one is the most effective. This stage can cost around 20 and 15 millions. And after that, if the study has positive results, finally we go in phase 3. Here we test the chosen dose on a statistically significant sample of patients, and this is a larger sample than phase 2. Here we are talking about 1,000 of patients, around 1,000 up to 5,000. And the cost of this phase is huge, usually over 100 million. So for each phase, you can also see the probability of success, because every time a drug goes in the clinical development, all the trials on humans are mapped. So all the data are available. And so it's very easy to do some statistics. Let's try to see a very simple example. So, for example, the cost of developing a single anti-cancer compound is, roughly speaking, about $200 million. And that's just for one therapy. The probability of success in oncology historically has been a little bit less than 5%. That's the success probability. It's so low. So in other words, you have a failure rate that is something in order of 95%. So how many of you would want to invest in this kind of investments? Once you tell to investor that there is a 95% of failure rate and you have to invest upfront 200 millions and your investment period is over 10 years. It's very difficult, to be a proposition for investor, but we still didn't talk about rewards. So let's see, for example, a real case. Here we have the Herceptin, that is the commercial name of trastuzumab, that is a monoclonal antibody. Every time that you see a drug that is called, the name of the drug finished with mab, you know that is a monoclonal antibody. So here we have a particular kind of breast cancer that is called HER2 positive, because tumor cells have an overexpression on the membrane, on the surface of the membrane, of the receptor HER2. And HER2 is an epidermal growth factor. Practically, this growth factor gives signal to the cell to grow faster and divide itself. So, consequently, the tumor grows very fast. Trastuzumab is a monoclonal antibody that binds to the HER2 receptor on the surface of the tumor cell, and the other part of the antibody attracts and binds to a particular kind of cell that we have in our immune system that are called natural killer cell. And as the name suggests, this cell, natural killer cell, kill the tumor. So This is a life-saving drug. It's a very important drug, and there is also an interesting story behind the development, and a book has been written, and there is also a movie. So to develop Herceptin, it took a very long time frame. First of all, we had the discovery of the HER2 receptor, and after some years of basic research, the discovery happened in 1981. And after some years of basic research to understand better how this receptor worked, Herceptin was created in 1990. After a couple of years of preclinical, they went in the clinical trial, and they get an approval of the FDA in the 1998, and the next year, 1999, they started the commercialization. So very long time frame, but the reward was amazing. In addition to saving many human lives, it generated billions in sales. If we use a discount rate of 5%, the present value of this drug in 1998 was $32 billion. Generally speaking, in cancer, if you get an approved drug, you are talking about something like a 12 billion asset. So in other words, after you take 10 years to do the clinical trials, and you are lucky enough to get a drug approved, you are going to get an asset that will pay out 2 billion a year in profit from year 11 to 20, which when you calculate the present value is worth about 12 billion. And that's one of the reasons why investors might be interested in the biotech, because the reward could be huge. But there is still a problem that more than 10 years is too long time frame for any investor. And so what happens in this industry is that we take this 10-year process and we chop it up into smaller bit-sized investment. And that's where biotech startup, pharma companies, and venture capital comes in. Pharma company, they moved their model from a research and development model to a search and development model that is for a more efficient use of their capital. This means that at some point, drug companies realized that they were more efficient if instead of developing drugs internally and taking so many years, so many capital and so much risk, they decide instead to look around and look for the most promising molecules and buy them in preclinical or in clinical development phase. So today, just to give you an idea of how this translates in numbers, today half of R&D budget of pharma companies is dedicated to internal development, and the other half to acquire externally other assets from biotech startups. So also the business model of biotech startups is different from other kind of startups, because here we cannot create companies thinking to go on the market because of the long period. So the business model of a biotech startup actually is to be created with a specific intent to be acquired by a pharma company. And all these elements, so the interest of pharma companies in early asset and the biotech company that are created to be acquired very soon, all these elements make the investing in biotech very interesting and very appealing for venture capital. So what is venture capital? Venture capital, as we can read in the Wikipedia definition, is financial capital provided to early stage high potential startup companies. So the venture capital fund earns money by owning equity in the companies they invest in, and after the company were sold. So venture capital in the biotech landscape is the part of the food chain where investors are trying to help take this idea from the laboratory into the clinic and ultimately into an approval from FDA or EMA. To understand better, let's use this graph that represents the life of a startup. We begin with an idea, a concept, and in order to take that concept and make it real, you have got to spend money. So this curve that you see is your cash flow. So the first few years, you are just burning up cash, and you have negative cash flow. You are spending money until such time as you basically start generating profitable activities. So this period can be a very, very long process. And for most technology company, it's actually pretty short. If you are doing an app, for example, the amount of cash that you are spending is not nearly as large as a biotech company. And second of all, things move so quickly that within a matter of, I don't know, 1 year, 2 years, you pretty much know if your business is good and you are a winner. And if you have a winner, then within another year or two, you are actually generating cash. So in 3 or 4 years, you are profitable if you are going to succeed. That's not true in biotech, because in many biotech companies, you are not even hitting your first milestone in 3 or 4 years. So it's a very different proposition. But in any case, where the VC come is not at the beginning when you just have the idea. They don't like that part, because at that point, it's really hard to assess what the investment returns could be. So where the venture capitalists come in is when you need a big slug of cash to get you over the hurdle to positive cash flow. So this area that is in the red box. So this is what is called the early stage venture capital, and then late stage venture capital. And after that, you can think about doing an IPO, so listing the company, the startup, and investor can exit from the investment and get investment return. So the idea behind venture capital is that they are getting a young company, a startup, from that point up until the exit. So now let's see more in detail how a venture capital firm works. So first of all, you have general partners. General partners are the individual who are selecting the project. So they do the jobs of selecting, scouting, investing in the companies, and supporting them in their growth. On the other side, we have limited partners that are institutional investors that invest in the fund that is created by the venture capital firm, so the general partners. So limited partners don't have a specific experience. They trust the experience and the investment thesis proposed by the general partners. And they just put money into the venture. So typically a fund lasts for 10 years. So once you set up a fund, the idea is that the general partner invests in various different companies. These companies are owned by the fund. And as those companies do well or not, it flows to the limited partners. So the limited partners actually experience the financial ups and downs of the investment that the general partners made. Just to give you a real example, we can apply this scheme to Claris Venture. So Claris Venture is the management company that has some general partners. That's me and my co-founder, Pietro Pugliesi. Claris Venture is an SGR, Società di Gestione del Risparmio, that is a special company that is authorized by Bank of Italy. We created a fund with a very precise investment thesis, that is to invest in startup companies working in the biotech in a particular stage. And this fund is called the Claris Biotech 1. So we did fundraising, and we had on board institutional investors like, for example, CDP Venture Capital, that is the venture capital arm of Cassa Depositi e Prestiti. Then we have some bank foundation like Compagnia di San Paolo. We have different family office and we have some private investor. All they invest in this fund, Claris Biotech 1, that we manage. And very recently we did our first investment in Neo4. That was around of 80 million, and we'll talk about it later. Here we can see the same things that I said before in a more schematic way. So at the beginning, we started doing fundraising. We attract the money, then we invest. After that, the company grows, then we support the companies where we invest. And after sometimes we try to exit from the investment, solving the companies. And the returns and returns coming from that goes to the limited partner of the fund, and hopefully they would reinvest in a new fund that we can create after some years. So now it turns out that venture capital is high risk, and it's high risk. Not surprisingly, because we invest in new companies where everything could happen. The most basic thing is that the science doesn't work, because also if you have, for example, very positive data in animals, only God knows if that drug will work also on humans. So it could happen everything, and moreover, they are young companies, so there is also a very important risk related to people. So people that want to invest in VC fund, they need to be willing to take losses, large losses. They need to be prepared to lose all the money that they invest. So investment in venture capital is not something that everybody can afford. In fact, here we have some particular main investor in venture capital are foundation, a big institutional investor that could diversify their investor, allocating a very small percentage of their asset in the venture capital, because, as I said, it's very, very risky. So with that said, the idea behind the venture capital fund is to lower the risk by creating a portfolio of high promising startups. So the hope is that even though a number of them will fail, and we call them the dogs, at least we will have 2 or 3 successes that we call the stars, that they might generate enough money to pay for all the other failures, and also to have a positive return for our limited partners, so the investor of our fund. So coming back to our drug development process, VC are interested in preclinical asset, and they give money to reach the clinical phase, because in that phase it's easy to sell the company to big pharma. They are not interested in the part that there is before, so the research and the discovery and early preclinical, because it's too risky. It's not possible to understand what kind of return it could have. So that part of development in the biotech, in the pharma development, usually we have other kind of investor. Basically, it's the research and development that is made inside the university. Then we have grants, we have philanthropy. They're all, for example, the association and the philanthropy organization that you can hear, for example, Teleton, AIRC for the tumor cure. So all that kind of player, they finance this early kind of discovery. So venture capital comes after. So, here another important thing. When the more as you get farther into your research and clinical discovery, the risk goes down. So at the beginning we have a so high risk, but more you go down to the process, and the risk goes down too. So each phase that you successfully conclude, it's an inflection point, and the value of the company increase. The really big drop in risk happens at the end of phase 2. If you get into phase 3, that is viewed as a very positive sign. Here, for example, we have this case that is Intercept Pharmaceutical. This company was founded on the discovery of an Italian professor, Professor Pellicciari di Umbria, of Perugia. They are developing a drug for NASH, the non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. That is a disease in the liver. So in 2014, they published the data of their phase 2 study, and just one day, the valuation of the company rise from 1 billion to 9 billion, just in one day. So unfortunately, this data were not confirmed by the phase 3 study, and here you can see that the risk there is always. In fact, in phase 3, they show a limited efficacy, and also they had several side effects. For example, a percentage of patients was suffering from an annoying itch, and in addition, some patients died during the study, and the company then claimed that the patients had died due to the advanced state of the disease, and they believe that. However, the FDA in the summer of 2020 denied the approval of their drug that is called Ocaliva, and the company has returned to a low valuation. They still have a drug for a rare disease, so this is the reason why the valuation now is come back to 1 billion and is not 0. So let's just take a quick look at the amount of money invested in venture capital. In US, this is a very serious business because venture capital create new companies, new giants, and create occupation, employment, create GDP. So they take this business very seriously, and as you can see, they invest a lot of money. So just for 2020, they invest more than $150 billion. In Europe, we are trying to increase the amount of venture capital investment. For 2020, we have 43 billions. We have best country like UK, France. UK is the best one in Europe with more than 10 billions of investment. France is around 5 billion. Germany is almost the same. Unfortunately, in Italy, we have still a low amount of money invested in this asset class. But so we have 600 millions invested in 2020. But we are increasing, and thanks also to new players like Fondo Nazionale Innovazione, we hope that this number will increase faster in the next year. So an interesting data to keep in mind is that biotech venture capital, it represents just the 10% of the amount of money invested in venture capital. But if we see the amount of money coming from the exit of VC-backed company, it weighs for 35%. So it's a sector with very interesting returns. And let's try to see that in more detail. Here we can see some data from EIF, European Investment Fund, that is the most important institutional investor in venture capital in Europe. They invest in a lot of funds across all the countries. Life science, as you can see in the left part of the slide, life science is the most important sector in terms of returns. Here, life science include not only biotech, but also medical device that today we don't talk about because medical device, they follow more the logic of traditional startup. Instead, the biotech has more specificity. Interesting is the fact that the half, if we move on the right part of the slide, it's very interesting that to observe that half of the biotech startup acquisition by pharma companies happens by the end of phase 1. So 50% of acquisition pharma acquired companies that are at preclinical stage or phase 1 stage, 15%. So the other important data is what you see down that graph, that the time to exit in the biotech, it's very short. Here you can see is 3 years. So from the first investment of the venture capital fund, this is because, as we said before, that long process of the drug development, we chop it up in smaller pieces, and this let the ecosystem to work very well. Just to give you an example, in other sector, the time to exit is much longer. Just for give you an example, in medical device, the average time to exit is more than 7 years. And so, what is the value of a biotech when it is acquired by a pharma company? Here we have some data, the average statistics. So if you successfully finish a preclinical phase, your asset could be valued in the average of more than 200 millions. At the end of phase 1, could be worth more than 300 million. At the end of phase 2, we are at 500 million. If you have phase 3, so you are getting the approval from FDA or EMA, your asset could be worth more than 1 billion. So considering all the things that we talked up to now, we can say we can criticize some false myth in biotech venture capital. Now that maybe someone could hear around. Biotech investing is complex, yes, sure, because it's really complex, but there is also high reward. It's risky, yes, sure, but I would say that it's no more risky than other sectors. And the fact that you have a probability of success for treatments, for type of molecules, etc., it lets you create a portfolio with a very diversified risk. There is need a lot of capital, yes, but not so much as you can think, because as we said before, you don't have to finance all the process. Here, the game is to finance just one part and then pass the hot potato to some other. And also, you know, also in advance how much money you will need. Instead, in other sectors, due to competition, maybe you need more money that you thought. And instead, in biotech, it is quite predictable how much money you will need. And another false myth is that you need a long time to exit, and this is completely false. And we saw it in the last slide. So just a few words about Claris Venture. Considering all this opportunity in the biotech, we created Claris Venture, the first Italian operator, just focused on biotech, because in Italy, venture capital funds were polarized just in two areas, especially digital and in the medical device. There was nobody that was investing in the biotech. And that was very strange, also considering the big opportunity that this sector could offer. I try to go a little bit faster here. Our model consists in have a strong partnership with the research center. In particular, here we have in Turin, we have a strong partnership with the Molecular Biotechnology Center that it's very useful to us for the assessment of the science and to reach scientists to help us to evaluate opportunities in these fields. We also work a lot with pharma companies because this is another important point. Because pharma companies are very open to see new opportunities and new science, they collaborate a lot with venture capital funds. So for us, it's very important to have their feedback when we assess an opportunity, because pharma companies are then the player that will buy our startups. And sometimes it also happens that you can co-invest with the pharma company, and that is a very great signal. For example, this investment that we made, we co-invest with 2 pharma companies. I will talk about it later. So we saw that in Europe, in general, there is this huge opportunity in investing in biotech because it can lead to very important return. In Italy, especially, we think that this is an untapped opportunity because actually we have great scientists. This is a research from Nature that showed that Italy is at the 3rd place in Europe for scientific production and the impact of this scientific production. Unfortunately, we are not so good in translating this science in business. In fact, if you see, we are at the 7th place in Europe for patents, and we go down at the 13th place for startup creation. In fact, one of the problems to be here in Italy is that we don't have so many biotech startups, and our job is especially to talk with scientists and understand on what they are working on. If we see an opportunity, then we support the scientists to create a startup. So we have a very strong hands-on approach. We cannot wait the biotech startups to be incorporated and come to our doors, but we have a very active role in the creation of the startups. As I mentioned before, we invest in preclinical. So we like projects that are developing drugs in high unmet clinical needs. This means that we look at disease that doesn't have a cure, or there is a cure, but it doesn't work very well. This is important for us because let us to achieve the exit in the early stage of development of the companies. Otherwise, if we would invest in incremental innovation, we will go farther in the development of the drugs, and this means more time and more money to invest. So our objective is to invest in preclinical data, possibly where there are in vivo data. So it means there were tests on animals, and we give the amount of money that is needed to complete the preclinical phase and to do a phase 1 and phase 2. So at that point, we reach the inflection point where we have the indication, the data about the safety. So we can say that the drug is safe, and we have a first indication of efficacy. Also, if a phase 2 is not statistically significant, but it is a good indication. So we have just announced our first investment. As I told you before, we led an investment round of 18 million in Neo4. And here we led the investment round. It means that we create the syndicate of investors and we manage all the syndicate. We co-invested with 2 pharma companies. One is Astellas, that is a Japanese, it's half Japanese and half USA company. That's a very large company. And the other one is Elsin, that is a Swiss pharma company. They were famous for the nimesulide, that is the Aulin, so a very famous drug. Then we invested with a German fund and an English fund. So what does Neo4 do? Before that, I have to spend a couple of words on immuno-oncology. Today, the frontier of innovation in oncology is immuno-oncology, meaning that instead to fight directly the cancer, we want that our immune system fight and defeat cancer. So immuno-oncology drugs are drugs that activate our immune system and fight the cancer. One of the main problems of cancer is that our immune system sometimes doesn't recognize the tumor. So a new class of drugs have been developed, and they are called inhibitor checkpoint drugs. This is a very important drug because they work incredibly well. These drugs let's activate a very strong immune response. And they are very effective. They can solve cancer in many cases. They are life-saving, but they work only on few patients, around 10%. So Neo4 is developing a drug that let the immune system recognize tumors, and it should work in combo with the inhibitor checkpoint. So the tumor usually is quite smart. It means that it stabilizes on the resistant immune mutation. Neo4 wants to break the natural mechanism of DNA mismatch repair that we all have in order to make the tumor more stupid. It's like meaning that we want that the tumor create more mutation. So in this way, it's like to put a red flag on the tumor, so our immune system could see the tumor, and together with the checkpoint inhibitor, create an immune storm that kills the tumor. So this market is very huge, and considering that just today the annual sales of the immune checkpoint drugs is around 25 billion of value, and as I said before, this is just works for 10% of oncology patients. With Neo4, we want to grow this percentage. I cannot say the target percentage that we want to reach, but consider that, for example, if you double the percentage of eligible patients, we are talking that from a market of 25 billion will go to 15 billion. If we want to take this percentage to 50%, it means 5 times this market. So it's a huge market from an economic point of view, but also a huge impact for oncology tumors, for oncology patients, because we can save millions of lives. So maybe I talk too much. Thank you, and that's it. If you want to contact me, if you're curious, you could write me on social network, on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ciro. Very comprehensive presentation, a lot of information, a lot of interesting information. Really going through the whole journey from venture capital to Claris Ventures investments. So we are actually, unfortunately, running out of time because I took note of.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I had 10 questions, but we don't have time. So I will put only one question. That is about something we are talking about. We're talking about these days. That is COVID, of course. So the question is the following one. So in COVID, we have seen collaboration between public investments and private investments. And many say that this allowed to fasten up the development of new molecules, going down from 10 years you mentioned to 1 year. So the question is, do you see a connection between the fact that public invested as well and how fast was the development of the vaccine against COVID? And second, do you see in future possible further collaboration between public and private to develop faster new molecules? I know it's a complex question, so take your angle and give a short answer.
Okay, let's say that it's not just about money. So if you put a lot of money, it doesn't mean that you have a faster process. Okay, you can do more things surely, but it's not just a question of money, because if you have to do experiments, you need that time to see the results. It's very depending from the disease. For example, there are some diseases that you need to see for a specific for 1 year, for 2 years, etc. And also the enrollment of patients, it's a big part of the process. So I would say just two things. Actually, it was not completely true that was just 1 year, because here we are talking about RNA medicine, no RNA drugs. This is also a very innovative frontier of innovation in the biotech, and the next investment that we will do will be in RNA medicine. So it's a very hot topic at this moment. So actually, this company, they already working on RNA medicine, and then they applied. So there are so many years of research in RNA, and for COVID, they applied this research for the COVID-19. So it's right, they developed a vaccine in 1 year, but the science that there is behind it's so many years. Okay. And consider also that the process was allowed from the regulators. So regulators that usually they say, hey, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. In this case, considering the extreme difficulty of the situation, they allowed to do more phase of the clinical trials together. So we have phase 1, phase 2 together. So this is let you to save time. So in the future, but anyway, in the future we have the demonstration that drug development process could be shortened. Not so much, but it could be. So it's a good insight that we have now with this pandemic, and I hope in the future, also thanks to the regulators, the process will be short.
Okay, thank you very much. There would be a topic for another innovation talks, maybe next year. I mean, shortening the development cycle of new medicines, so important for our aging society. So most of the global society is aging, so this is bringing about a number of new needs. But I would stop it here. Thank you very much. I think Professor Giordano is joining us to close the innovation talk. So thanks again, Ciro, and goodbye.
Thank you. I just want to say thanks, Ciro, and thanks to Domenico. I do believe the relevance of and importance of the role of the public institution and public investments in this industry. And we can learn a lot from this COVID experience. I think that public investment can mitigate the risk of private investors in this industry, but can also set the priorities in the agenda of the research, because and also they can guarantee the integrity, the ethic integrity of the process. In particular, in the case where you need to push, to go fast in order to find a solution of a global health issue. So I do believe that we need also hybrid capital in this area, because I think we will need a lot of research, and so biotech, I think, is just at an early stage in terms of development, because it's an industry that will grow a lot in the next years. And this is my poor perspective, because I'm not an expert, I'm not a player, but I'm a citizen, not that is interested in the good biotech research, and the biotech research in the interest of the citizens. Also, then of course the private players that populate this arena. So thank you, Ciro, for this very, very interesting overview of this topic, and Domenico, thank you for your support. So see you next week. Next week we will talk about artificial intelligence. So another interesting talks. So have a good lunch to everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.